This is an introduction to the poetry of Emily Dickinson by the Leaving Cert students of Boherbue Comprehensive School.
Emily Dickinson was born in 1830 in Amherst, Massachusetts. She came from a very religious family and community. Dickinson is often depicted as a recluse who spent all her time in her room. However, our study of Dickinson shattered this stereotypical view, as she clearly enjoyed nature and the time she spent outside. In fact, she wrote over 500 poems on nature.
She was a revolutionary writer. Her poems, style and ideas were shocking for their time, even more so when you considered she was a woman. The way she mocks and questions religion despite her religious upbringing. The Dickinsons came from a strict Protestant background and community. Main themes. She deals with themes such as death. The death of her close cousin at 14 triggered her lifelong fascination with death. I felt a funeral in my brain. I heard a fly buzz when I died. They were taboo topics for her time. Other themes were the beauty of nature and mental anguish.
Emily Dickinson's style is unique. She didn't use titles as she wanted her readers to be immediately immersed in her poetry. She can be recognised immediately for her unique use of capital letters for emphasis and her use of dashes for reader reflection. This break of traditional punctuation marks shows her rebellious nature. Even when her favourite writers suggested she regularise her poems, she refused.
We're now going to talk about I Felt a Funeral in My Brain. There can be two readings of the poem. A person experiencing their own funeral, or alternately, a person's journey into insanity. It is an intensely personal poem for Emily Dickinson. However, despite the poem's serious themes, we witness Emily Dickinson's dark sense of humour. The poem is ended with a cliffhanger questioning the afterlife, which was shocking at the time.
Keep quotes. I felt a funeral in my brain. This line, though seemingly presenting an impossible situation, is dramatic and unusual, enough to express that something terrible is happening. My mind was going numb. This line refers to the overwhelming chaos in the speaker's mind and conveys the intensity of the breakdown. Then space began to toll. Space conjures images of absolute emptiness, and the line has connotations of mental breakdown. And then a plank in reason broke. This is the point at which the speaker loses their grasp on reality, and finished knowing then. This final line ends abruptly, and this may be to convey the idea that the speaker has finally lost their mind.
It is a poem worth knowing as it provides great imagery and an insight into the mind of someone going insane. It is also considered one of her as her masterpiece. It is also worth knowing because it deals with mental illness, which even today is a taboo topic.
The poem we will discuss is I Heard a Fly Buzz When I Died. Here Dickinson speaks from the persona of a dying person. The family and friends are gathered around. The atmosphere is tense as they wait for God to appear. Here she shows a seeming faith in the afterlife. In a shocking twist, instead of God, a fly appears. The fly was the last thing the person heard before dying. Here she questions the existence of an afterlife.
Why this poem is worth knowing. This poem deals with the universal themes of death and religion. Her use of dark humour is unique, as she tells us that on her deathbed a fly appeared instead of God. This poem is fascinating to read, as it is deeply honest and intensely personal, which gives the reader a vivid insight into the fragile mind of Emily Dickinson. This poem is shocking considering what time it was written in, as Emily Dickinson deals with the taboo subject of death and questions the existence of an afterlife. The use of contrast between the first three stanzas and the final stanza is powerfully striking.
Key quotes and why. The first quote we chose is, I heard a fly buzz when I died, the stillness in the room. This is a key quote as Dickinson challenges the belief that when you die, God will come and take you to the afterlife. Instead, the dying person last witnessed a fly buzz. It displays her uneasy relationship with religion. The next quote we chose is, and breaths were gathering firm. This quote sets the tension and suspense felt by the family as they wait for God to arrive. The last quote we chose is, there interposed a fly. This is ironic and dark. God did not arrive. She mocks people who believed he would by using an unimportant, insignificant fly. It shows her black humour.
The next poem we'll discuss is A Bird Came Down the Walk. In this poem, Dickinson enjoys a simple experience of watching a bird in its natural habitat. Keenly, she depicts the bird eating a worm, pecking at the grass, hopping by a beetle and glancing around fearfully. The bird then flies away gracefully.
Why is this a poem worth knowing? Dickinson exhibits her extraordinary ability of observation and description. She captures the ordinary event using vivid images. She provides a breathtaking image in the final stanza of The Bird Flying. She offers a comparison of flight and a rowing boat. This image becomes very clear to us through her use of descriptions. It's extremely memorable.
Key quotes. A bird came down the walk. This quote engages the reader. He bit an angleworm in halves and ate the fellow raw. This shows the vicious and ruthlessness in nature. Hop sidewise to let a beetle pass. This shows the other gentle side to nature. Unrolled his feathers and rowed him softer home. Then oars divide the ocean. This is a beautiful metaphor that describes the bird in flight. Or butterflies off banks of noon leap plashless as they swim. The image also shows the sheer elegance of the bird in flight.
Now we're going to talk about I Taste Liquor Never Brewed. This poem is about Dickinson being intoxicated by the beauty of nature. She uses an extended metaphor of alcoholism to illustrate her drunken state. However, she is drunk on nature, not alcohol. This poem demonstrates the exhilarating effect of nature on her. Her humour in the third and final stanzas enhances the appeal of the poem. It also contrasts with the poems like I Felt a Fly Buzz and I Felt a Funeral in My Brain. The drunken metaphor would have been very rebellious at the time as she came from Puritan Protestant background.
There are many reasons why this is a poem worth knowing. This poem uses a typical Dickinson style, in that she does not use a title and uses capital letters and dashes to emphasize key words. She uses an extended metaphor of drunkenness to describe her love of nature. The poem has a light-hearted and playful tone which shows us a different side to Dickinson. The poem shows us we can get high on life and do not need alcohol to enjoy ourselves. This is very relevant to us as teenagers, as we are of the age where we can imagine the little tippler being drunk and leaning against the sun. A study of Dickinson is not complete without this poem, as it shows the humour side to Dickinson and proves that not all of her poems are depressing. It also gets us as teenagers to appreciate the beauty of nature.
The key quotes in this poem are, I tasted liquor never brewed. This is a paradoxical opening. It confuses the reader into asking themselves what alcohol is not brewed. Scooped in pearl. This shows the preciousness of nature to Dickinson. Inebriate of air, debauchee of dew. This shows she is drunk on air and seeks all pleasures. This is a complete contrast to the recluse she is considered to be. I shall but drink the more. This shows she cannot stop being intoxicated by nature. Again, this is an image of Dickinson as a rebellious woman. Seraphs and saints to windows run. She portrays the angels and saints in heaven in a mocking manner, as looking down at her in a drunken state. To see the little tippler leaning against the sun. This is humorous, as we can imagine a drunk person leaning against a lamppost, for example. The bright sun also ends the poem in a light, happy and joyful way.
Finally, we're going to talk about Hope is a Thing with Feathers. The poem is about the power of hope. She uses a metaphor by comparing hope to a little bird. She describes something that is abstract to a concrete image. The bird is depicted to be spiritual, resilient and strong. Emily Dickinson focuses on how important hope is in her life during times of difficulty and anguish. The tone is optimistic and uplifting throughout.
Why is it a poem worth knowing? This poem is worth knowing as it is relevant to people our own age, especially with the stress of the Leaving Cert. We all need hope. In times of despair and hardship, hope is always there. Her unique style, such as dashes, capitalization, highlights important words such as gale, extremity, and the sweetest. It shows another side to Emily Dickinson, and it is so happy and optimistic. It is a refreshing antidote to her more depressing poems.
Key quotes and why. Hope is a thing with feathers. The title of the poem compares hope to a bird that perches in the soul. This quote shows the bird is depicted as spiritual and never stops at all. This tells us that hope is never ending, that kept so many warm. While she refers to storm and gale, which suggests the problems in people's lives, it shows us that hope is still there for people. I've heard it in the chillest land and in the strangest sea. Emily Dickinson now focuses on the role of hope in her own life during times of trouble, yet never in extremity. It asks a crumb of me. Hope confronted her in times of crisis and never looked for anything in return.
This was a B1 production by
Conor O'Keefe,
Nicola Drake,
Daniel England,
Telangani,
Ellie McElroy,
Lisa Gilman,
Kate Collins,
Adrian Carroll,
Grieva Meehan,
Niamh Brosnan,
Peter O'Keefe,
Amanda O'Sullivan,
Anya Curtin,
Norma Walsh,
Guivo Mahoney.
Susan O'Keefe.
Lisa Fitzgerald,
Susan O'Keefe.
And Thomas Fitzpatrick.